asshole, ugly, mother, big. Your mother is a glorious. I can't say those things on this website, but if you head over to extratug.com, you can hear all of that in its exclusive glory. All right, we're gonna do it. We're gonna talk about it. I've been ignoring it for a very long time, and it keeps coming up, and I feel like I have to mention it, so I'm gonna go really hard on this one. So the cool thing about this channel is I don't have a theme or consistent content. Like, I can talk about whatever I want. I talked about little cute animals, then I talked about how The Simpsons predicted the end of the world. Like, it doesn't matter what I do, you people will watch it. Well, within reason. I appreciate, it's not me saying like I'm a god. Like, I appreciate you guys turning up, but you guys don't care what I do. But somehow, no matter what I talk about, it always seems like the Cold War keeps popping up. It's like that one friend that's a friend of your friend, but every time you throw a house party, that dude shows up even though you didn't really invite him, and he totally kind of sucks. And at first it was annoying, and then it became scary because I felt like I was being cursed by Stalin. But the more it came up, the more I realized it was extremely important to our understanding of, like, you know, the world right now. And that got me thinking, maybe I need to tear down the Berlin Wall that surrounds my heart. Every time it came up, I'd be a little bit pissed, but no longer. I'm gonna appreciate what the Cold War is and what it did. Not all the killing, not all the death, but besides that, so I'm gonna make a whole video dedicated to this. But the problem is, it's really big and long, and there's technically like no real beginning or end of this thing. So this video is gonna be long, and don't be pissed at me because you guys in the comment section said make longer videos. I want to fall asleep to your videos, and that one hurt my feelings. But two, it's good to get for the views for the YouTube. So whatever.
But first, let's do an ad!
Personally, I find it offensive that TV shows told me that my skin would stop getting acne after pubescence. To this day, I get such bad breakouts on my face that the average teenager would point and laugh at me in a way that would make me cry in public. But there are a lot of terrible skincare products out there that will promise to help you, but they're full of harsh chemicals that a lot of people don't react to well, and sometimes they do a lot more harm than good. But fear not, fellow acne haver, because Geology's Clear System lineup is here to save the day. Geology is a 41-time award-winning personalized skincare company recognized in Men's Health, Esquire, and Ask Men Grooming Awards. You go to their website, fill out a brief survey, and they make up a simple but effective skincare routine and customize it just for you with ingredients that are proven to work. They also offer help with hair care if you have dandruff. This sponsorship was very directed at me. I was sent a Blemish Buster kit, which is fantastic when I know I have to film tomorrow morning, but my chin is a nightmare. Acne Control Face Wash, which is great because my girlfriend has been giving me a lot of trash talk for using regular body wash for my face. Acne Control Body Wash. A lot of people don't talk about acne. A lot of people go right over that. I need help with this more than anything. Clear Skin Face Cream for, you know, maintaining. And Skin Repair Moisturizer because, God forbid, I'm a lizard. I need constant moisturization or I will die. These are safe skincare alternatives to benzoyl peroxide, and they clear skin fast, prevent breakouts, and overall don't dry out your skin, which once again, I am a lizard, that's super helpful. So if you're interested, head to geolog.ie, it spells geology, /BigTug, or click the link in the description, which will head you directly to Geology's Clear System lineup, and it's also available at Target, if you were wondering. Geology, fixing skin like an overachieving taxidermist. Don't know if they want me to say that, but it's a good joke. I'm gonna be breaking down everything weird that happened in the Cold War, and I'm not gonna be talking about the boring history because you can just go watch Ken Burns or something. I'm not that. The Cold War is full of drama, and it's full of will they, won't they's, and it's all about proxy wars, nuclear bombs, sexpionage, and two-headed dogs. So let's just I'm getting right into it. So most of us know the broad strokes of the Cold War, even if it's just from movies like, I don't know, Rocky IV and Miracle. Oh my god, how good is the movie Miracle? Opportunities, boys. I quote that all the time when I'm playing Rocket League, and no one knows what I'm talking about. Even if the Russians make Cold War sports movies like Going Vertical, a film about the USSR's gold medal winning 1972 Olympic basketball team, it does seem odd that there are so many movies about sports and the Cold War. Like, that crossover seems to be happening a lot for some reason. But it turns out that's actually because of a concept called sports diplomacy. Sports diplomacy is the idea that sports can influence politics or the perception of political power. And this concept is practically tailor-made for the Cold War because this was a conflict that saw no direct fighting. In its essence, the Cold War was practically a dick measuring / pissing contest between the Soviet Union and the United States. The lore stretches all the way back to World War II, where the US and the Soviet Union were kind of like enemies, but also friends. They were frenemies. The Soviets started off World War II by colluding with the Germans, taking advantage of Nazi forces destabilizing Europe in order to occupy and annex territories that would eventually make up the USSR. But then Hitler hit him with the old, actually, you know what, dude, switcheroo. I'm sorry, I f***ed up. I'm gonna attack you now. I'm gonna invade you, because that seems like the move. And the Soviets were like, Okay, Britain, you chill? We gonna be chill? And Britain was like, I don't know, dude. Yeah, sure. If you're gonna fight against the Germans, whatever. You got a lot of people. And because the Soviets became friends with the British people were friends with America, so tangentially, we were chill. And America jumped into the World War after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and that wasn't so cool. But this is not a video about World War II. I don't know what I'm doing right now. But even during the war, there were tensions simmering just below the surface, including the USSR's refusal to aid the Polish army, and the US excluding the Soviets from negotiations with Germany. After the US dropped atomic bombs in Japan in 1945, everyone said, oh, we're done. We're done? Holy sh**. The war was over, and the uneasy alliance between Russia and America became immediately paranoid, and not good. Many historians look at the decision to bomb Japan as a catalyst for the Cold War. Japan's defeat was all but certain, and the Emperor of Japan was like, we're done, you don't have to do anything, but America said, f*** you, kinda, pretty much. The US demanded unconditional surrender, meaning like, when this thing's over, we're not gonna debate anything, we won, you lose, you gotta do everything we say. And they were like, I don't know if we wanna do that, and we were like, bombs! Bomb them! Many even argued that dropping the atomic bombs was a show of power by President Truman, and that nuclear bombs were used in a part to keep Soviets from gaining territory in the Pacific. So like, it was, you know, it was to f*** up the Japanese people, but it was also like, hey Russia, I know you're right up there, and we, you know, don't come over here. We're dropping crazy shit. We're microwaving people. But whatever the exact motivations were, the fallout from the atomic bomb created the perfect conditions for the Cold War. By the end of World War II, the US and USSR had built up a laundry list of animosities. That's the word I was trying to say. But more than any single incident, the root for the Cold War was an ideological one. Both countries were like fist pumping the propaganda into people's mouths for capitalism and communism. But you know which teams were doing that. America and Russia were creating societies that feared and demonized each other so that they could use that anger and fear for political gain. And that narrative obviously continues to this day. That's not like an old-timey thing. In 2024, Florida governor and leather boot filled with yogurt, Ron DeSantis, signed a bill requiring all Florida public schools to teach the dangers and evils of communism. Kinda corny, but politicians are opportunists. They're gonna take every moment they can to scare the shit out of people and use that for political gain. And then in 1964, USSR Prime Minister Joseph Stalin, he's a big player in this story, he gave a speech claiming that peace could not exist under capitalism, reiterating Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin's theories about imperialism and war. In 1949, the US pledged to contain communism by doing a little thing called the Truman Doctrine, which said it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation. And then in the same year, NATO was created. You know NATO, the thing that Putin really f***ing hates right now. That was created after the USSR blockaded Berlin. And when West Germany joined NATO in 1955, the USSR spearheaded the creation of the Warsaw Pact. You guys getting all this? It's a lot of statements and dates, and I know that feels like history class, but I'm trying to make it fun, but we gotta talk about this to talk about the cool shit. And I know I'm also probably pissing off a bunch of history buffs because I'm omitting a lot of shit, but Jesus Christ, I gotta get through this. But my point is, like most huge geopolitical events, there is no one way to explain how this happened. That's what I'm trying to get at. No one country has ever, or could ever, take the brunt full blame of the Cold War. The history of the Cold War is like watching a tennis ball fly back and forth over the tennis net. Only in this instance, the tennis ball is the threat of nuclear annihilation. So, probably not a great analogy. It was actually the threat of nuclear war that made the Cold War stay cold. It actually didn't stop it from heating up because people were afraid of that shit happening, but that's not to say there was no conflict throughout the entire Cold War. But instead of actual, face-to-face combat with their own soldiers, these countries did a little thing called proxy wars. Chris, put some cool shit back. Put some cool shit when I say proxy wars. Like, proxy wars. You know? I don't know. You don't have to. I don't know. So are you like an American born after 1995 and like me, anytime the Korean War comes up, you think to yourself, what the f*** was that? We were taught a lot about wars in our history classes, but for some reason, the Korean War is like completely forgotten in American culture. And then when you hear North Korea is so f***ed up, you think to yourself, did we do that? What happened? What did we do in Korea? Well, the Korean War is considered the first major military operation of the Cold War. Russia and China backed North Korea, while America and the UN supported South Korea. This proxy war was extremely bloody. Like 3 million people died within just 3 years of time. And while they signed some shit in 1953, no peace treaty was ever agreed upon, and this war is still technically ongoing. This results in a heavily guarded border named the DMZ, which is the demilitarized zone between the two countries, North Korea and South Korea. And this is where you get those clips of North Koreans trying to escape North Korea by running over that zone and just getting blasted with bullets. I don't know if I'm on the wrong side of the internet, but it's not fun to watch. But there's a reason people try and escape North Korea, because that sucks big donkey balls. The human rights violations of North Korea are considered crimes against humanity, and many citizens are jailed or even executed for things like not clapping enthusiastically enough for their supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. When I was a kid, it was Kim Jong-il, and I wasn't alive for, I don't think I was alive for the guy before him, but, you know, it's a dynasty of pieces of shit. But these motherfuckers get brainwashed. It's honestly a little impressive how an entire country could be so thoroughly, you know, beat down by propaganda. Like, these people believe that the Kim family invented the hamburger and that they don't poop. And I know that you shouldn't make fun of those things because it is a really sad situation, but it is interesting nonetheless. So yeah, that was America and Russia fighting, but not really fighting, but that wasn't the only time we did that. For instance, how about the Vietnam War? We know a lot more about that as American citizens. The Vietnam War was eerily similar to the Korean War, with China and Russia backing the South Vietnamese and the US supporting the North Vietnamese. So it's the same, but they swapped polarities. Lasting from 1955 to 1975, the war cost 4 million lives, over half of which were civilians. Ooh, whoops. Now, Vietnam and the war that happened there could surround its own video. This is a very big topic with a lot of, you know, delicacies. But the reason for the war stemmed from decades of colonial rule by the Japanese and the French, and the political implications were massive. It inarguably changed American culture forever. It's important to lose sight of the importance of the Vietnam era as time marches on, with the conflict threw the US into complete turmoil. It gave rise to a counterculture that changed politics, music, and drugs forever. And for a lot of US citizens, it showed just how far the US government would go just to squash dissent. Like the 1968, like, Chicago, what was it? The Democratic Convention, where a bunch of protesters got, like, gunned down in the street. They don't teach you about that shit. Police use brutal tactics, like pushing protesters through glass windows and throwing tear gas directly into their faces. It was an entire week, and it left 500 protesters completely f***ed up and 600 of them arrested. But Chicago wasn't nearly as deadly as the Kent State Massacre. In 1970, the National Guard killed 4 students and wounded 9 others at the Kent State University Vietnam protest. With a notable growing of lack of interest in this war from the people back home in the US, the government would pull out of the Vietnam War in 1973 at the Paris Peace Accords. And once Americans were out of Vietnam, the peace accord was immediately broken, and the South and North Vietnamese continued fighting, and then, who won? The North won. The North won Vietnam. And then in 1976, the country was reunified as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. But once again, this is all related to the Cold War. This is the Vietnam War, Korean War, all Cold War, which is unbelievable to think about. And in the midst of all these proxy wars, we almost had a full-blown nuclear war. If anyone played Call of Duty, I think Black Ops 1, you're familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis, are you not? Let's not forget about the Zombie Map 5. Chris, go ahead and put a picture of that.
Oh my God! It appears the Pentagon has been breached.
Zombies.
Dude, I just looked up the
Zombies.
thing he was talking about. That's true. That's like 100%. Everything you said was true.
Cuban Missile Crisis is as close to the world has ever probably come to a nuclear war. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution saw Fidel Castro rise to power, turning Cuba into the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. This threatened the US, and in 1961, they attempted to overthrow Castro with the Bay of Pigs invasion. So, something that a lot of Americans aren't good at is geography. We don't know, we couldn't point to, like, Turkey on a map. But something that I found out pretty early on, but I found interesting that a lot of Americans don't know, do you know how close Cuba is to America? It's like a stone throws away from Florida. Like, it is right there, so it made sense to be a little bit worried. And even though the invasion was a horrible failure that fell apart in 2 days, it inspired the USSR to protect a Castro-led Cuba in the name of preserving communism. It's like old Karl Marx said, bros before overthrows. That's a Jimmy Pitts exclusive joke, everybody. Give applause. In 1962, Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev began building a nuclear missile site in Cuba. Once the US found out, Kennedy was like, "Pah! What the f***? Blockade. What the f*** was that, Cuba?" And Russia considered that to be an act of aggression. Secret messages were exchanged between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and though both leaders wanted to avoid conflict, neither wanted to seem weak, so a standoff began. Finally, it was time for the world to really see who had the biggest cock, and I think it was Kennedy, because that dude was f***ing. The world was on the brink of nuclear war, and Kennedy was beginning to think an attack on Cuba might be necessary after a US spy plane was shot down over Cuba. After 13 days, the Soviets decided, hey, you know what? We'll take the nukes out of here. I don't know what we were doing, really. And then the US pledged to never invade Cuba, which is nice, but, you know, they never did it, but that means nothing to Americans. Like, we will invade you after we say we won't. That's our whole shtick. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a little too close for comfort for both superpowers. It spawned a direct telephone line between the White House and the Kremlin called the Hotline. And then the following year, they negotiated a little thing called the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which banned testing nuclear weapons underwater, in the atmosphere, and in outer space. So no more f***ing, what's that movie that came out? No more Oppenheimer shit, okay? and we're blowing that up. We know what they do. We don't have to do that anymore. Whoa, did Tucker change his outfit? Don't worry about it. We're gonna continue on. In 1958, the US Air Force cooked up the top secret project A119, which was a plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon. And why would they decide to do that? Excellent question, and the answer is... you. That's pretty much the long and short of it. The Soviets had just been a few steps behind the US in the nuclear arms race ever since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but by 1957, the USSR had established itself as the leader in the space race by launching the first satellite into orbit. Now, losing ground in the space race to the Soviets got everyone in America all shook. They all got shooked up. So while the US was scrambling to get their space program in order, the military was over there and they were like, hey, let's just launch a nuke at the moon. Maybe that would make us win. And although I made it seem like that, just to be clear, this wasn't like an idea that they had on the back burner and was thrown out by a hungover general at a meeting. It was seen as a viable option. The US had a team of scientists working on Project A1119, including a young Carl Sagan. But the scientific gains of launching a nuke at the moon was not the primary objective. The goal was purely shock and awe, like a fireworks show, except it really shows everyone the devastation that could happen. And to that end, the blast had to be impressive enough for the entire world to notice. Now, when you launch a nuke at the moon, I would assume everyone would notice, but only half of the people could see it at once, so had to be a full moon, I guess. And this is probably why the US never went through with the whole blowing up the moon thing. The optics weren't perfect. Scientists who worked on the project claimed that the Air Force wanted a mushroom cloud so large it would be visible from Earth. But the whole thing about mushroom clouds is that they need a dense atmosphere for that perfect little mushroom shape. And since the moon notably has a lack of atmosphere, wasn't viable for that type of situation. And instead, what would happen was it would have kicked up a whole shit ton of dust, and then maybe the dust would have orbited around the moon, and then you have a ring around the moon, which forever, that you just changed what we see around the moon forever. That's too much for a little fireworks show. While there's no official reason given for the US abandoning Project A11-9, it seems most likely due to the risk of public outcry and the lack of spectacle. No one really knew about this until 2000, whenever they declassified the documents, and everyone was fucking scared about that, so obviously it was a good move not to go through with this. But if you thought nuking the moon was scary, obviously it's gonna get scarier than that. We're not even halfway through this video. So even though stockpiling nukes was the name of the game in the nuclear arms race, the Soviet Union wanted to give the proceedings a little big dick energy, so they decided to make the thing called the Tsar Bomba. Now, the Tsar Bomba sounds like a Russian King Bob-omb from Mario Party. That is not the case here. It was actually the largest Russian nuclear bomb ever tested, showing the world that they were an equal nuclear power with the US. Tsar Bomba was a bomb that was so big it could actually never be used during war. It was 26 feet long and weighed 27 tons. It was heavier than 4 elephants and produced a blast that was 1,500 times more powerful than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. It was impractical and stupid, but like all things during the Cold War, it was just a show of power to make other people know that you're not to be with. In 1961, the Tsar Bomba was dropped on a remote archipelago in the northern reaches of the USSR. And this thing was so big that in order to carry it all the way up there, they had to modify a bomb-carrying plane. They had to make a special plane to carry the special bomb. And the bomb was so big that it had to be attached to a parachute to drop correctly, and the parachute itself weighed a ton. So that's 27 tons now. 28. And it also needed a parachute because if it didn't have a parachute, it would have gone off too quickly, and the plane that was flying it would die. So it had to have a parachute to slow it down so the plane could be safely 30 miles away so this thing could go off. And also, even though it was 30 miles away, the pilot still only had a 50% chance of survival. Who took that mission up? Who said, yes, sir, put me on that plane? Upon detonation, the Tsar Bomba created a 5-mile-wide fireball that could be seen from 630 miles away. The mushroom cloud was 40 miles high, which, I don't know how high the Earth is. That was a stupid question. Jesus Christ, don't even include that, Chris. The mushroom cloud was 40 miles high and stretched across 60 miles at its width, which, I don't know if you can even picture that in your head. It's really fucking big. It released the same amount of energy as 57 million tons of TNT and was 10 times more powerful than all of the military weapons used in World War II combined. And its blast waves orbited the Earth 3 times. I don't know what that means. I don't know if Americans felt that. They probably got scared. The blast completely destroyed a village 34 miles away, and towns over 100 miles away experienced things like, collapsed roofs and all-around fear. Many countries condemned the Tsar Bomba test, claiming that it went too far, and at the time it was dropped, it was 20% of the size of every atmospheric nuclear test before it combined. So, pretty stupid, but it doesn't stop getting stupid. I'm gonna talk about another thing now. So we've been talking about the US and the USSR a lot, but we can't forget our little friends over the pond. Let's talk talk about Britain real quick. While they weren't the imperialist superpower that they were before the World Wars, they were still an integral part of NATO and developed their own nuclear capabilities during the Cold War. However, sadly, their nuclear ideas were painfully British. Like, for instance, we have Operation Blue Peacock, which, could you guys be less obnoxious with the way you name things? I asked Georgia a couple days ago what they called Ding Dong Ditch, and I think it was like Nicky Nacky Runna or something like that. Like, you people are ridiculous. After World War II, Germany was split in half between the East and West, and it was seen as the most vulnerable spot for the Cold War to turn hot. Britain was concerned about Russian forces invading West Germany from the north and began developing atomic landmines that could remotely detonate to thwart an attack. These landmines weren't smart because they would leave a crater the size of a football field and would make the area it went off in impossible to occupy for most of human history. And if that wasn't stupid enough, there was one more problem. Northern Germany's temperatures often dropped below freezing during the wintertime. And you can imagine that's going to be wrong for some kind of science shit going on in the ground. Britain was concerned that the landmines would be comprised by the cold, so they came up with a finger-licking good solution: chickens. This is not a joke, okay? Everyone has to focus up real quick. This is a real part of history, and it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Live birds would be placed inside the landmine with enough food to survive for 8 days, okay? Their body heat would keep the mines warm enough for long enough so they could still detonate, and then the chickens would obviously die by the explosion, or they would just starve to death. Either way, the chicken is dying. After 4 years of development, Blue Peacock was ditched in 1958, and then the project was declassified in 2004 on April Fool's Day, because I can imagine the British government said, this was so stupid that maybe we can make people think that this is all one big joke. Alright, so that was a fun little aside about the British people. The adults are talking now. Let's go back to the big ringers. In 1962, a year after the Soviets tested Tsar Bomba, the US went full supervillain and set off a nuclear bomb in space. The project was called Starfish Prime and was a part of a series of tests called Operation Fishbowl. That's how you name Britain. You name it like you're a fucking Bond villain. An aquatic-based Bond villain, but a Bond villain nonetheless. So the goal was twofold. The first objective was to basically freak everyone the out. Scare the shit out of people, as we do. And the second objective was to see what would happen. So we were just skiddly scatting free jazz with our nuclear options at one point in history. In 1958, physicist James A. Van Allen discovered belts of radiation in outer space, and Operation Fishbowl set out to see what would happen to these belts after they were exposed to nuclear explosions. And going back real quick, James A. Van Allen is a terrible name. I hate that name. I keep looking at it and I hate it. I don't know if I just had to get that off my chest. Moving on. The blast was opposed by the Soviets, because of course it was, and they called the US Atom Mongers, which sounds like a really cool name for a ska band. But here's a fun fact: the USSR conducted a high-altitude nuclear test just 3 months after. So, like, shut the f*** up. You guys are dorks. You did what we did, but you did it after us, which is always less cool. But this was the Cold War, so narrative meant everything. You had to talk shit and then do the same thing other people were doing. It was all for show, a little kayfabe. The US was brazen about Starfish Prime, making no secret about blowing up nukes in space. And Americans were shockingly chill about the whole ordeal. A newspaper in Honolulu even ran the headline, "End blast tonight may be dazzling, good views likely." Come on, kids, let's all go out on the lawn and look up at our devastating future. The nuclear explosion set off a light show that lasted a full 7 minutes, creating rainbow stripes and artificial aurora borealises in the sky. So it probably was beautiful, but once again, like, that's like literally looking into the eyes of God, the death god, whatever that was. In the immediate aftermath, satellites were destroyed, electrical services failed, street lighting systems went on the fritz, and circuit breakers were tripped, which set off tons of burglar alarms. But the lasting impact of Starfish Prime was the artificial radiation that they left out in space. This radiation belt was even stronger than the radiation belt that inspired the tests, and it lingered in space, destroying any satellite that happened to go into it for a full decade. But it's good to know it only takes a decade for that thing to go away, so more nukes in space, why not? So while the arms race had a way of spilling into space for some reason, thankfully our impulses to nuke the moon were traded out for sending people into space. But there's just one problem. To boldly go where no man has gone before, you have to send a man in a place where no man has gone before, and we don't know if people just die. Like, if you go out into space, we don't know if people would just die because of that. We didn't know if they could survive, like, the travel to get there. We didn't know if they were in zero gravity, if they would just, like, disintegrate. Like, every time I think about astronauts, I'm like, everything in your body just kind of lays inside of there. When you're in space, like, all your organs are kind of just, like, free floating, right? Or unless there's like fibers that keep shit together. I failed anatomy in high school. Even with the smartest minds on Earth crunching the numbers, there were still a lot of unknowns. And time was of the essence because in the Cold War, everything was about being first. So to expedite space exploration, the Soviet Union and the US turned to the animals to send them into space, and this gets real sad real quick. In the early stages of the space race, the USSR had America up against the ropes. They sent the first satellite into orbit in 1957. Chris, put up that clip of the Stinky Pete saying Sputnik, if you could find that in overlay it when I say
Already
Sputnik,
did it,
that'd be
dude. You don't have to
fantastic.
say it
Chris.
over and over.
Don't
No.
talk. Do not talk back to me.
Pussy.
Then they sent the first man into space in 1961 and conducted the first spacewalk in 1965. But the true pioneers of space exploration were dogs. By the time cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, what the fuck is that name? Gagarin? I don't know how to say his name. By the time he circled Earth, dozens of Soviet dogs have been up there by that point. Russians preferred using dogs over other animals because they could build strong bonds that led to better obedience. And they trusted them with their lives, and then they get shot in a rocket up to space. I fucking hate this part of the story. And they were using like strays they found on the street because they believed that they were scrappy Moscow dogs that could really survive on their own. So these were strays that they pulled out of their normal lives and sent them up into the space. K9 cosmonauts would undergo intense training, and while some exercises were basic dog training like stay, others were insane, like keeping them confined in small boxes for 20 days at a time and riding in rocket simulators and centrifuges that stimulated high launch acceleration. You know how your dog hates being in a car? This is like a car times a million. Like it's smaller than a car, but it also goes a million miles per hour in a circle. They were also subject to surgical modifications that would allow scientists to monitor how spaceflight affects the body. And then in 1951, the Soviets sent 2 dogs into space, which I don't know how to pronounce their names, but they sent them to the edge of suborbital flight. It lasted a total of 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, the dogs experienced 4 minutes of weightlessness. But good news, they made it back to Earth safely, and they were the first mammals to ever go into space and come back and not die. Only a few months later, Dzik, I think that's how you say one of their dogs' names, and another lady called Lisa went up into space, but their rocket parachute failed to deploy. And they both died on impact when they came back down. But I mean, whatever. I mean, a lot of Soviet dogs did survive. However, there are some exceptions. This is the saddest part of the script. I kept trying to not get there, but it's just words on a page. I gotta keep reading them. You know about my girl Laika, the space angel? In 1957, the Soviets knowingly sent a dog on a suicide space mission. The USSR had just made the first huge gain in the space race by launching Sputnik, but Russian leader Nikita Khrushchev wanted another big space event to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the Bolshevik Reservoir, whatever the f that thing is. Scientists only had a few weeks to put an animal into orbit, knowing full well that they did not have the capabilities to bring this thing back. They decided to pick my girl Laika, whatever, for sacrifice. To the Russians' credit, they tried to make her demise as human as possible. Their theory was that she would die from oxygen deprivation, peacefully, or at the very least eat some poisoned food that they left for her, which is so f***ed up. However, after circling the Earth once, her capsule overheated and the malfunction and stress killed her less than a few hours into her trip. A faulty temperature control system seemed to be the blame, which was a part of how hastily this process was pushed through. And then Sputnik 2 eventually broke up into Earth atmosphere when it came back in, and it technically spread her ashes all across the Earth. And I find that beautiful. It almost made me cry a little bit. Woo! God damn, I haven't been sleeping. You can't blame me. But after all of that, the USSR gave conflicting reports on how she actually died. They usually said a much friendlier thing of she died of freezing to death or the poison food that we fed her. In 1993, a Soviet scientist who helped send Laika into space said, "The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We shouldn't have done it. We don't learn enough from..." Why am I crying? We did not learn enough from this mission to justify the death of the dog. But at that time, animal welfare paled in comparison to winning the Cold War, and Laika was viewed as a necessary sacrifice and a hero. And in the most Russian way possible, they put her face on stamps, and also her name became a brand of cigarettes. God bless her. Today, Laika is memorialized as a part of a statue at the Russian Cosmonaut Training Facility, and has her very own statue at the research facility where she was trained. Her legacy continues to this day, and with the song Like a Party, the official entry for Ireland in the 2025 Eurovision Song Contest. And here's a line from that song that let's see if I can get through saying without crying. "Through the comets and the stones, she is howling for her bones." I am good. I'm fine. I got it out. Okay. But we forgot to talk about America. And America loves one-upping, motherfuckers, so they decided to send a bunch of monkeys into space. It was traditional for monkeys from America to be sent into space, and it started much before NASA was even created. In 1948, the US Air Force put a male monkey into a capsule of a Nazi-designed V-2 rocket. Yeah, I forgot to mention, Operation Paperclip, a lot of our rockets were made by Nazis. We're not gonna get into that whole thing. The monkey, named Albert, suffocated before he reached space, so... I don't know why I don't feel as bad for monkeys as I do dogs, but I don't, whatever. But that didn't deter the US though, we were still gung-ho on the monkey ship. In 1949, Albert II was sent into space. We were like, whatever, who needs to name monkeys? Just keep giving them numbers. And he had a successful suborbital flight, but he did die when his parachute failed. But if you're concerned that we would stop trying then, you don't know America. Later that same year, Albert III died when his rocket exploded. 2 months later, Albert IV died when his parachute once again failed. Albert V died the same way, 1951. But finally, in September of that year, we brought one of our banana boys home safely. Albert VI successfully landed from his space flight. But he did die 2 hours after he landed, so I don't know if we should count that. Later in the decade, we were like, let's switch things up. Monkeys keep dying, let's send a squirrel named Gordo into this bitch. And finally, in 1958, a squirrel monkey named Gordo deployed his parachute after a successful mission and fell to his death after his parachute failed. I don't know if I f***ed up the script part here and said are squirrel monkeys real? Alexa, what's a squirrel monkey?
A squirrel monkey is a type of monkey that
Alexa,
lives in
stop.
the tropical...
So I guess that's a real kind of monkey. I don't know. I don't know if I don't know.
I'm not quite sure how to help you.
I'm not talking to you. Yes, squirrel monkeys are real. Moving on. Ignoring the previous decade of space monkey fatalities, NASA was ready to tackle human spaceflight by the early 60s. Yeah, monkeys kept dying, but time for humans, I guess. They pivoted to chimpanzees for the next phase of testing during the space race, primarily because humans and chimps are so closely related. We share more DNA with chimps than any other animal, and also chimps are incredibly smart. They know how to rip off penises, and that's all I know about them. Instead of merely being passengers like dogs and monkeys of past space missions, scientists wanted to see if chimps could complete operational tasks during missions. The US sourced 40 chimps from an exotic animal dealer in Miami who had just bought the primates from an African trapper. Like, what the f are we doing? That's the most American way we could ever get something done, buying chimps from a fella in Miami. NASA trained them for space by using G-force simulations and taught them to pull levers by electrocuting the soles of their feet. From the class of 40 primates, chimp number 65, renamed Ham, was chosen for the mission. Ham's rocket launched into space about 1,400 miles per hour faster than anticipated and reached an altitude of about 42 miles higher than planned due to a crack that caused air pressure loss. I just imagine those scientists watching Ham's space flight just being like, there he goes. Go, that's too fast, too far, oh god. But despite everything I just said, Ham would not face the same fate that the Alberts before him did. His suit offered him enough protection where he wasn't burned up and he was able to complete his tasks and make it home safely. Well, kind of safely. There's more caveats to this. And also, he was wearing a little suit. I find that adorable. After his 16-minute flight, he landed about 132 miles away from where NASA intended him to. Because there was a crack in his capsule, he nearly drowned waiting for his rescue. After seeing photos of Ham during his rescue, Jane Goodall said, "I've never seen a chimp with more terror in his face." Ham was pretty traumatized after the event. He even refused to get in his chair for post-op photos. But as a result for torturing a chimp that had been ripped from his home in Cameroon, Alan Shepard Jr. would become the first American in space just 4 months later. As for Ham, he would spend the next 2 decades alone in a cage in his Washington, D.C. zoo until he was eventually moved to a zoo in North Carolina where he died in 1983. So sad for Ham. After his death, the Smithsonian wanted to put his body on display, but the public outcry was swift, and instead, his skeleton was removed and kept in the National Museum of Health and Medicine, while the rest of his remains were buried at the International Space Hall of Fame. So he was a famous chimp, but he was a sad chimp. So let's change it up a little bit. Even though the front runners of the space race were obviously the US and the USSR, France was doing some stuff sometimes. It's cute, really, to think that a country like France thought they were going to the moon or some shit. I'm sure all they wanted to do was smoke ridiculously skinny cigarettes next to the Sea of Tranquility. But just like the Brits with Blue Peacock, the French really out-Frenched themselves with their contribution to the Cold War. In 1963, they sent the first and only cat that has ever gone out into space. Which, if I had to pick the most French animal, it would definitely be a cat. Felicette was one of 14 cats who were subjected to confinement, loud rocket noises, and centrifuge sessions, and she was chosen for the operation because she was the only cat who didn't gain weight during stressful situations, which my poor Abby, I cannot imagine. Oh my god, I can't imagine doing this to my cat. With electrodes in her brain, she was rocketed into space for 15 minutes and survived the landing to become one of the most important figures in cat history. But sadly, there was no parade for the sweet little kitty. No one seemed to give a shit. The French chose to send the cat into space because at the time they were widely used for neuroscience. And Felicette was euthanized 2 months after her space journey to figure out what happened in her brain. You guys, honestly. I'm always mean about the French, but that is dog shit behavior from dog shit people. Alright, now let's stop making fun of the French and talk about spies. Spies are fun, and a lot of spies did do things during the Cold War. Espionage predates the Cold War by about 3,500 years. The earliest evidence of spying comes from ancient Egypt, and it's been part of kingdoms, regimes, and governments ever since. The backdrop of the Cold War was especially ripe for spy games. With the looming possibility of nuclear war and the constant struggle to lead the world in space exploration, the US and USSR were constantly trying to steal top-secret information from each other. This led to a wave of communist paranoia in the US known as the Second Red Scare. During the mid-1940s, and through the 50s, known piece of shit and Senator Joseph McCarthy and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover accused many left-wing actors, politicians, and educators of having communist ties or being Soviet spies. I talked about it in my Ren Fair video. For some reason, those things were connected. American citizens were subject to the FBI using illegal tactics like burglarizing their homes, opening their mail, and wiretapping. The House Un-American Activities Committee used the subpoena power of Congress as a tool to intimidate citizens. To put it mildly, we were spinning our wheels because of the Soviets, but honestly, it wasn't that far-fetched. 4 years years after the US dropped the atomic bombs that ended World War II, the USSR was able to test its first nuclear bomb. This is thanks to Soviet spies who stole information while working on the Manhattan Project. They talked about it in Oppenheimer. Wasn't a big plot point, but that was a big issue that happened. For example, German-born British scientist Klaus Fuchs, who was part of Britain's atomic bomb development program before being sent to the US to work on the Manhattan Project. In 1950, the US discovered Fuchs' espionage work, and he was detained by British authorities. And the discovery of this dude led to the US to have an even bigger ring of spies who infiltrated the Manhattan Project, led by Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The couple met as a part of the Young Communist League and became spies once Julius landed a job as an engineer and inspector at the Army Signal Corps Engineering Lab. Rosenberg gave exclusive documents to the Soviets through a network of recruiters that included project engineers, chemists, and military scientists. The couple was arrested in 1950 and were guilty of doing all this bad shit. In 1951, they were given the electric chair, making them the first American citizens ever executed for espionage. Most Europeans were outraged over their deaths, and it was widely debated their innocence. But when the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, newly obtained Russian documents clearly showed Julius Rosenberg's involvement in espionage. Ethel's role, however, is still questioned, but you know, she was f***ing him, so she probably was aware he was doing something. But the Rosenbergs weren't the only spy team who were sucking and f***ing during the Cold War. In 1965, Karl and Hanna Koshir left communist Czechoslovakia and posed as defecting dissidents. When Karl asked the Czech authorities how he was supposed to infiltrate the CIA, they told him, "That's up to you, pimp, figure it out." And Karl went big. He went biggie mode. He went biggie mode on their asses. The Koshirs became American citizens in 1971, and they lived large in New York City. They drove around in a blue BMW and lived in luxurious apartment buildings with actors and athletes. Hannah sold diamonds and had a taste for expensive fur coats, while Karl split his time between Columbia University and the CIA. They were the quintessential New York power couple, and they'd probably live in Williamsburg if they could in modern era. But behind the scenes, Karl infiltrated American security agencies as a CIA translator, passing along sensitive documents to the Czech secret police. And that wasn't the only way these young fangs got classified information. They did it with their bodies. They out. They were f***ing around. They were getting information from people at sex parties. Ever been to one of those? Probably not, you f***ing virgin. Of course, US agents aren't supposed to attend sex parties because it puts you in a pretty compromising position, but the heart wants what the heart wants, not to quote Woody Allen and his daughter. These two were plunged into a swinging scene that included CIA officers, Pentagon officials, and at least one US senator. And it's funny to think that these dudes stopped doing this. All our politicians are having sex with each other all the time. That's my conspiracy. The Koshir's wife swapped their way through the intelligence agencies and politicians, bumping uglies to gather tons of intelligence for the KGB. They are eventually caught and imprisoned for 2 years, eventually making their way back to Czechoslovakia as part of a spy swap. When they arrived home, a gold Mercedes was given to them and a parade was thrown in their honor for literally f***ing their way to the top. Now, this was pretty common with KGB agents, and a former KGB agent was asked why sex was used so much during these espionage acts, and he said, "In the West, you ask your men to stand up for their country. In Russia, we ask our young women to lay down." Good God. Sexpionage isn't a creation of movies or TV. It is a actual spy tactic. And just like other skills crucial to intelligence agencies, it's one that's taught to agents. Ex-CIA agent Jason Matthews claims that the Soviets created their State School No. 4 as a training ground for sexpionage. Here, students, also known as sparrows, would learn tips and tricks on how to seduce their targets to give up information, or luring their targets into, sticky situations so they would give up secrets. And I mean, I'm not into that freaky shit, but if you're tied up with, your back and balls hanging out, you probably say whatever you can to get that iron grip off them nuggies. These techniques are also referred to as setting honey traps. And the Soviets often recruited people who were already in the military for sexpionage, but that wasn't always the case. Often college students and actresses were also recruited for their looks and intelligence. And once students were in class, they were given the fly course on all things sexpionage. Their training included physical tasks like martial arts training, hand-to-hand combat competitions, and firearm practices. And also more cerebral things like learning foreign customs and how to talk without a Russian accent, though I think that having a Russian accent is probably harder than not, but I understand why that'd be a red flag. They were even trained carefully on how to eat caviar and open bottles of champagne, depending on the tradition of the country they were spying on. And of course, most importantly, they learned about sex and how to do it good, and how to make fellas big. I don't know if you can put that in, Chris. I don't know. That was funny though. I'm in extra tug mode right now. Put up the picture for extra tug so people know about it. Thank you. Students were taught how to get information from agents by learning the art of seduction, and classes often revolved around watching sex documentaries and studying the Kama Sutra. In some classes, students were even forced to expose themselves to get better at sex techniques. And after their crash course on sex education, each student was given their own sexy lingerie and sent out into the world to their way through everything they need to get done. While they were often covertly embedded into foreign agencies, sex spies were also sent to swanky clubs and five-star hotels in Moscow to seduce traveling diplomats. And sometimes, to help intel, they would often wear fake nipples that were actually microphones to figure out what people... If I was having sex with a young lady, and one of her nipples was, different, I'd at least try and pick at it. I don't know. But it's not all about the ladies and sexpionage. The Germans were doing a lot of things with boys with big wangs. East German counterintelligence agencies focused on male agents, known as Romeos, to employ sexpionage tactics. But since they were setting honeypots primarily for women, they had a different crash course on how to get this done, and namely, they had to teach men how to listen to women, which I think is so funny. And this is not some hacky, female comedian bit from the 90s. They literally had to teach these men how to be, good husbands and good, partners and listen to women yammer on all day. Am I right, fellas? Jeez, I don't put that in. Romeos were recruited for likability, charm, and ability to listen. The idea was that by being charming and knowing how to make themselves the center of attention, women would be drawn to them. But then, because they could actually listen, the target would enjoy talking to them and confide more and more information. This is literally how I pulled my girlfriend. I was funny, I just listened to her talk all day, and I enjoy it, she enjoys it. I would be so good as a Romeo, dude. I'm not tall, though. That's probably an issue. I don't know. I could get it done. Even more than Sparrow's sexual seduction, Romeos were pretty f***ed up. They didn't just they made you fall in love with them. This was a long con that would happen over years and years and eventually often ended in marriage proposals. Once a Romeo was married, they would reveal that they were a spy, but for a friendly country or ally like Canada. Then they would tell their wife that in order for them not to be taken from their country, they would need to give her the information to satisfy their bosses. It was such a successful tactic that by 1978, they had at least 53 women compromised by Romeos. By 1980, NATO had started a list to help single female secretaries in order to ensure they weren't marrying East German spies. But guys, this is a message to the fellas out there. Obviously, you don't have to be f***ing machismo to get done. You just have to be friendly, charming, and listen to ladies, which I know is not that easy. It's easier on paper, but Jesus Christ, these men were ruining governments by just listening to ladies. You don't think you can find you incels, you f***ing losers? But while sex provided an effective tactic for helping the Soviets steal state secrets, the US had another idea, which arguably is almost just as fun, and that answer was drugs. Let's do drugs, let's just do those. While searching for a truth serum, the US ended up drugging tons of military personnel and civilians without their consent. These drug experiments were used to make, people less violent and make interrogations easier, but at the end of the day, it just ended up f***ing up a lot of people's brains. It was the Cold War, so in the eyes of the government, the end justified the means, even if the means violated, basic human rights. From 1948 to 1975, the U.S. Army tested chemical weapons on American soldiers at their Edgewood Arsenal factory. These experiments were very classified and affected over 7,000 soldiers. Many of the soldiers were technically volunteers, though they were often misled about what exactly they were signing up for. Like the use of deadly sarin gas, which was accidentally developed by the Nazis while trying to invent a cheap pesticide. Is it just me, or does science feel like a crazy shot in the dark sometimes? Like when you accidentally try and develop a pill for hypertension and then all of a sudden you've made Viagra. Like Grandpappy now has a raging boner. Like that's how it happened. Or you're trying to kill some weeds and then you develop a gas that could kill thousands of people with a click of a button, Whoops! The sarin gas at Edgewood was so strong that birds passing over the gas chambers following sarin tests dropped dead from the sky and regularly had to be removed from the roof. Some subjects of Edgewood's chemical treatment didn't even volunteer at all, like professional tennis player Harold Blawer, whatever. He checked into the New York State Psychiatric Institute in 1952 after a bout of depression following his divorce. Edgewood Arsenal had struck a deal with the Psychiatric Institute that allowed them to secretly test chemicals on patients. And he was injected with 450 milligrams of mescaline and died that following day. In the 60s, psychiatrist Colonel James Ketchum joined Edgewood. He became known as Dr. Delirium. Never a good sign when a ranking officer has a name like that. It's like, Colonel Kill-em-all. Not good. Dr. Delirium was obsessed with the idea that chemical weapons were more humane than traditional weaponry. He was especially fixated on LSD, which is not good to have an evil scientist be thrown that at people all the time. He believed that the Soviets were stockpiling large amounts of LSD for military use. Veterans who experienced Edgewood claimed that they were going there for military, training, and in reality, they were experiencing chemical weapons and crazy hallucinogenics. Soldiers would hallucinate for days after their tests and go temporarily blind, and some tried to kill themselves. Many soldiers left that place scarred for life, full depression, tried to kill themselves after they were there, and had full-blown nervous system disorders. So if you're a soldier right now and someone tells you to take a pill, just don't do it, because I'm guessing this hasn't stopped. Now, it's hard to overestimate the hysteria that surrounded the Cold War. Even a rumor or error in reporting could lead to decades of top-secret experiments. This is precisely how the CIA came to develop MK-Ultra. In the 50s, the US was increasingly paranoid that the Soviets were outpacing them in interrogation techniques and technology. A lot of this was based on false reports from the Korean War that Soviet-backed North Koreans developed mind control capabilities. This, to use a technical term, is insane. No one has ever made full mind control possible yet, but the CIA was convinced. In 1953, they created a little number called MK Ultra. In many ways, MK Ultra was a continuation of a scientific experiment that started in Nazi concentration camps, so not a good start. Not only were many of the experiments based on Nazis' work, but like I said, Operation Paperclip, they were hiring Nazis to do these experiments. The work was headed by chemist Sidney Gottlieb, who was known as the Black Sorcerer. And if you're keeping score at home, yes, that is another comic book level supervillain name. The Black Sorcerer was desperate to find a truth serum to use while interrogating prisoners of war. And while he never fully developed mind control, they were using things like LSD to really see how easy it is to interrogate someone when they are completely blasted off into outer space. In the early 50s, the Black Sorcerer arranged for the CIA to buy the entire world's supply of LSD for $240,000. Ironically, that means the CIA was responsible for bringing LSD, the drug that really pushed the counterculture in the 60s, to America. And due to the classified and unethical nature of the experiments, the project spread across 80 different institutions like college campuses, prisons, and hospitals. Often, the researchers involved didn't even know their work was going towards the CIA, though they may be playing a little coy because these experiments demonstrated a large amount of lack of humanity. From verbal and sexual abuse to electrocutions and torture, it's clear that MK Ultra wanted to break humans. One mental patient in Kentucky was given LSD for 174 consecutive days without his consent. Others were heavily drugged and sat next to a record that was playing vocal suggestions on a loop, or even left to float in a sensory deprivation tank while accidentally filled up with acid. We still don't know the full extent of MK Ultra because thousands of documents relating to the project were destroyed in the 70s, and I hate to be that guy, but that sounds suspicious as shit. I mean, if you accidentally destroy thousands of documents, you were probably doing some horrifying tasks. Fortunately, a few MK Ultra files were misfiled and found during a government investigation of the CIA. And in 1976, President Ford issued an executive order that prohibited experimenting with drugs on humans without their consent. But you know, weird that we have to have an order for that. You know, it's like, oh, we'll pass a bill so this doesn't happen again. Why were you doing that in the first place, you f***ing creeps? And while some MK Ultra, experimentation people were scarred for life, there's some, like, big hitters on this list that turned out to be part of MK Ultra. Whether it was a positive experience or not, there's still no doubt that it would change you. For one, we had Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, who had such a great time during his MK Ultra experiments that he would host the iconic acid test in San Francisco that turned a generation onto LSD. So he was into it. He was thrilled to go through that experience. Some people are made for LSD. I'll say that. If I ever took an hallucinogenic, I would completely freak out and make my friends call the hospital, but some people take really kindly to it. And then you have Robert Hunter, the Grateful Dead lyricist, who wrote the lyrics like, "Your rain falls like crazy fingers." So yeah, that checks out. That dude loved acid. And then there was like mob boss Whitey Bulger, the guy from where I'm from, Massachusetts, who was like, you know, the Irish mob, who was a gigantic piece of shit. He was part of MK Ultra too. He was dosed with LSD 50 times while volunteering for experiments in prison. He murdered 11 people. And most disturbingly, out of all of them, was Charles Manson. You know, the guy who's like, "I'm a bum, I'm a wino." Yeah, you ever seen that? Put up the interview he does where he does that.
I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine.
This cult leader used many of the same tactics as MK Ultra, keeping his members on the steady dose of LSD while manipulating them sexually. And while it isn't proven, author Tom O'Neill book Chaos makes a case Manson being involved in the projects, and I think it's pretty obvious that he actually was part of MK Ultra. But allegedly. Although f*** him, it's the CIA. What are they gonna do, sue me? And drugs weren't the only questionable experiments going on during the Cold War. Science in general had a very disturbing think outside of the box vibe. It's obvious that these world leaders were willing to do whatever they could to get an edge over the competition. From using Nazi innovations to torturing their own citizens. But just like the space race, some of the most imaginative scientist efforts came from the Cold War, involved hellish treatments of animals. MK Ultra, for instance, wasn't only about humans. The CIA was using animals with mind control for some reason. Declassified documents from 1967 show that the US government successfully created a type of mind control in dogs. By electrically stimulating their brains, scientists were able to control their movements by hijacking their reward centers. They achieved this by embedding an electrode into a mound of dental cement and then implanting that in a dog's skull and running connections past the dog's shoulder blades. But once again, what are you gonna get at making it training? You could just train a dog. Why are you moving it with electrodes? And the dog can only be controlled within 600 feet, but by hitting buttons, you can make the dog come back, run in a circle, and make it stop. So, whatever, you had a remote-controlled dog. According to government records, 6 of these mind-controlled dogs were created, but never were really fully used in the field. And they ran into a bunch of issues while testing this technology, namely, you know, like, infections was a big one. Also, wounds that the dogs suffered from having a wad of cement implanted in their brains, which, you know, overall would hurt efficiency. It would compromise efficiency when their dog brain is swelling. And not to be outdone, the Soviets were doing some weird shit with dogs too. Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikov was a pioneer in organ transplants. He was one of the first guys to do like an organ transplant, a heart transplant, lung transplant, liver transplant. But because this was the Cold War, he was also responsible for another truly unhinged first, the first head transplant. Demikov started working on head transplants in 1954, performing the surgery over 20 times. And this was hardly top secret work. Demikov saw this as like the next big step in transplant surgery. It was so out in the open that in 1954, Time magazine traveled to Russia to capture the 24th attempt at creating a two-headed dog. They documented the process, which by that time has been done so many times in a row that it only took 3 hours to get it done. Both dog heads could hear, see, smell, and swallow, but they didn't share a stomach. Whatever the transplanted head drank flowed onto the floor. You might be wondering what the point of all this was. And that's a very good question. Even though Demikov's early animal transplants paved the way for modern-day organ transplants, there isn't really any good reason for a head transplant. It had no practical medical application whatsoever. And also, it was practically a death sentence for both of the dogs involved. The longest any of these two-headed dogs would live was 29 days. Whatever Demikov's motivations were for this horrific experimentation, it inspired the future work of American scientist Dr. Robert White. But in true US fashion, we used monkeys instead of dogs. Starting in 1970, Dr. White would perform head transplants on over 30 monkeys. And once again, to no scientific benefit did that happen. No reason to do that at all. We learned nothing from these experiments. But hey, two-headed monkey. Though dogs and monkeys were the animal heroes of the Cold War, the US got cats involved with Project Acoustic Kitty. It sounds like the name of a feline-friendly folk band, but at the end of the day, they were just trying to turn cats into spies, which is interesting. The idea came to agents in 1960 while noticing the feral cats were roaming around unnoticed by government officials during secret meetings. By leveraging the constant presence of cats with their natural curiosity, the CIA developed a plan. They would implant transmitters into cats' necks. And they would train them so they could go near government officials and they could spy in on what people were saying. Or in the crude words of a US officer, they slit the cats open, put batteries in him, and wired him up. But sadly, the CIA quickly found out the cats don't do what you want. They couldn't give two about what you tell it to do. And as a cat owner, I can confidently say that the cat at my feet right now is an absolute nightmare. Isn't that right, Abby? Yeah, you're a piece of shit. The cats would wander off whenever they got hungry. And hey, you know what? Cats are always hungry. So they added another wire in the cat that would override the cat's hunger. And finally, the CIA was ready to deploy their covert cat spy operation in the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. They released the cat from an unmarked van outside of the embassy. And before it even get going, it got hit by a taxi and died. So, plan over. The project was ditched in 1967, costing $20 million taxpayer dollars, so glad we got that through. But that $20 million was truly just a drop in the bucket. There is no official number, but estimates of Cold War spending easily amounts to trillions, dedicated to bombs, drugs, blasting animals into space, and fighting other countries' wars. The end of the 4-decade conflict was just as murky as its beginnings. For many, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall that signaled the end of this conflict. The Berlin Wall was built in 1961, becoming a physical manifestation of the ideological divide between the East and West. When the citizens of East and West Germany descended upon the wall on November 9th, 1989, they brought picks and axes to literally tear it down. A month later, the US and USSR would verbally declare the war over at the Malta summit, but we already knew that happened. It was the equivalent of your parents telling you they were going to get a divorce when you've been seeing the writing on the wall for at least 4 years. USSR officially disbanded on December 26, 1991, and as the Iron Curtain fell, the German rock Scorpions took the stage. Their 1991 single, Wind of Change, served as a soundtrack to Germany's reunification. Also, conspiracy theorists believe that the song was written by the CIA to help unify the two sides. I think that's a little far-fetched, but it's fun to talk about. And even though these rumors have been thoroughly debunked, it honestly isn't any crazier than sex spies or two-headed dogs. The legacy of the Cold War is complicated, but it left Russia and America with 5,000 warheads each. So while the immediate threat is gone, the cool breeze of the Cold War haunts geopolitical policy to this day, in events like Russia invading Ukraine or Elon Musk proposing we nuke Mars. Most leaders and politicians are opportunists who take take fear to consolidate power. It's a tale as old as time. So maybe instead of risking countless lives to settle our ideological differences, we just need to fully embrace sports diplomacy and turn the Olympics into a violent bloodshed that everyone knows we are taking this very seriously. New videos every Saturday and every other Wednesday. Like, comment, and subscribe to Extra Tug while you're at it. $4 a month. You get a new video. Now you get to see the videos a day earlier, right before they come out. You get to vote on the videos we're going to do later. You have a direct line to comment at me because I read all the comments over there. So, you know, just have fun. There's a lot of names going across the screen. This video is long as I can't believe I got it all done. I did it in 2 takes. So that's good. I thought I was going to have to take a lot more time to do that. Anyway, thank you guys for watching so much. I'm sure you've already skipped off the video by now, but you know, Extra Tug. See your name on the screen. It's fun. All right. See ya, p****s.